Mr. Edgar Wright back on the podcast in Zoom box form. I'll take it though, because I got the human experience last night. We had a fun Q&A in Brooklyn. Obviously, this is a relief for you. Obviously, working for audiences. Did you have a chance? Did you have a chance to like show this to many audiences the last year? What have you been doing with this, Edgar?
I guess. Well, yeah. I guess actually, I like the Sparks Brothers movie, which I only got to go to one sort of public screening of it with Ron and Russell. You know, most of the press for that was like I was doing it by Zoom. But then with Last Night in Soho, we went to Venice and Toronto, and I did Fantastic Fest and the London Film Festival. And then last night I was in Brooklyn with you but that was great because it felt like a regular Q&A with an audience that came out on a Sunday night, and it was really special. I mean, I think that's the thing is in this time that we're in as kind of cinemas are coming back, I hope I don't take things for granted anyway, but I really don't take things for granted now. Just watching the film on a big screen with an audience is always special, but now it's more special than ever.
Yeah, I feel like I've discovered human emotion I didn't realize still existed in this aged body in these times when these communal experiences, which obviously you and I just are so part of our souls. It really, I do find these experiences that much more powerful. It's been a long road for this movie. It's been a long road for many movies, but this one, you've kept on ice for a while. You wanted it in theaters as it should be. What was it? Talk to me about the last year. Like, was there anxiety, thought like, oh God, is this going to end up on Peacock on a Tuesday night? Like, was there ever any consideration that this could go down a different road, or were you adamant and was the distributor adamant that this was the way it was going to happen?
Well, if that discussion was ever had, I never heard about it.
They were smart enough to keep you out of it.
Well, I think, to be honest, actually, Focus and Universal, who, financed and are distributing the movie, they felt the same way as we did, is that it deserved to see the big screen. And so, like many movies that sort of got kind of pushed into, earlier, we didn't finish the film until Christmas last year. So its original release date, we wouldn't have made anyway, but cinemas were, I guess that's when cinemas were sort of open because Tenet was out, but we weren't finished because the pandemic had basically put us on hiatus for 6 months.
Got it.
And so we didn't finish it until Christmas last year. And then originally it was scheduled for April, but in the UK, cinemas were not open in April at all. They didn't reopen until May. And we just thought, this feels like more of a, I'm going to say fall. I always feel weird saying fall, autumn for me, but it's more of a fall movie, an autumn movie. But it just felt like the kind of movie that should be out in October, the kind of movie for when, the nights are getting longer and colder. That's when you should see this movie. So when the opportunity came up to put it back where it would have been in the first place, in October, in time for Halloween, great. It literally has a Halloween disco scene in the movie, so it's perfect.
Perfection. This is, we talked, I think the last time on the podcast, among many filmmakers we've talked about, was Brian De Palma. At that time, you had never met Brian. Still haven't met Brian?
No, I still haven't. I feel like he's probably going to be one of those people I never meet. But and we have lots of mutual sort of contacts and stuff, but I've never met Brian De Palma, no.
So, I mean, I know probably every different journalist and interviewer is going to bring up a different inspiration for this film, because there's a lot. The truth is, obviously, it all feeds into this and all of your work. But for me, seeing this is, there's some De Palma in there. It's clearly, you, like many great filmmakers, Hitchcock, De Palma, love playing with doubles, mirrors, duality. De Palma was always, I always enjoyed how like he could make kind of the grotesque beautiful and the beautiful grotesque. And I feel like there's elements of that in here. Was he on your mind much at all in pre-production and production and post?
Yeah, I think all of those, both Hitchcock and De Palma, of course, and also Michael Powell as well, who maybe didn't make as many, Michael Powell made lots of different types of movies, but when he does make films that are like thrillers or psychological horrors, I mean, Black Narcissus isn't quite a horror film, but it's in that realm. And I think what those filmmakers all have in common, and listen, but I want to stress, I'm not putting myself in the same bracket here. I don't want the takeaway to be like Edgar Wright puts himself in the same sentence as Hitchcock. But what I like about those films is that they take on that pure cinema idea where there are sort of moments in the movie where they become sort of truly operatic and expressionistic, and they're not necessarily taking place in an entirely real world, but because you're hopefully under their spell, you kind of go with it into a different realm. And that was always the idea with this movie. And other directors as well that do this brilliantly, like some of the Dario Argento films do this really well, and also even, you know, other people have had an influence on it in terms of like even Antonioni, or like just things where sort of like you once you get into the rhythm of the film, sort of hopefully it's cast its spell on you.
Right.
And then within this movie, not giving too much away, but in the latter half of the movie, Thomasin McKenzie's character has not slept. And I sort of, on top of everything else which is happening to her, which is a lot, there's something where when you get sleep deprived, you become like manic in a way where just like, even just tiny things feel like they're about to drive you kind of insane. And it was sort of in the finale of the movie, you're in that zone, and this poor girl is kind of on this sort of journey, but on top of that, she's sort of sleep deprived. So and kind of she's supernaturally switched on and is kind of hallucinating.
Yeah.
So but I like those. There's movies that like Black Narcissus, or like you know, De Palma's like Dress to Kill or Psycho, Frenzy. They sort of like kind of enter this like other realm where it's not quite the real world. It's sort of like this kind of pure sort of cinematic nightmare, you know.
More than any of your other films, this one, I think, benefits from knowing as little as possible going in, and I know that's been important to you to preserve the surprises of this. Has it been difficult? Like, what do you want like an audience to know, ideally, going into this film?
Well, I think, you know, I think what you can gather from the trailers is a good sort of setup in terms of, you know, young girl comes to London in the modern day. She's obsessed with the 60s. She has a sort of gift to feel like these visions much more strongly than your average person. And in her dream, she starts to go back to the 60s and seemingly inhabit the body of somebody that used to live in her house. So
wackiness ensues. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. It's funny. I mean, like, you're because of the nature of the kind of film this is, it's probably I don't mean this as a knock, it's the least funny of your movies. Yeah. To say. But like, is that almost like a weight off the shoulder? It's like, that's one less thing to worry about. I don't have to worry about like, it's been 35 seconds in the script or in the film, they need to laugh.
It was always designed as that. And I think I said this in the Q&A last night, that I'd always wanted to do something. I mean, it's not really a straight horror film. It sort of builds into that. It's more like a sort of psychological thriller for most of it, but it certainly builds into sort of operatic sort of horror, I guess. And I'd always wanted to do something in that realm, but it was also about finding a subject matter that scared and disturbed me. Because I felt if it was something that didn't, I feel if you're making a horror film and you're making it about something that doesn't scare you on any level, then you're probably doing it wrong. Seems like a weird thing to go to work and sort of be complacent about it. So with that in mind, there are some sort of heavy themes in the movie, and, you know, it's much darker material than anything else I've done. And I guess I never worried about like whether there were any gags, because I just wanted to sort of honor the material in a way, or where it was coming from.
Yeah.
And you know, as part of that, as much as like the filmmakers that we talked about, is really also just the area itself. You know, in terms of like what's the real inspiration for sort of Last Night in Soho is just like that particular part of London, and how sort of compelling and disturbing it is in equal measure.
It's funny in retrospect, when, you know, whenever we have these kind of conversations, you try to come up with the links throughout the work, and I'm sure it's been cited over the years, but this one even like cements this kind of theory. Is, you know, all of your work is so grounded in very specific locations. You know, whether it's the town in Hot Fuzz, the pubs in the World's End, you know, you changed location in Baby Driver, but then took advantage of Atlanta. And this could only be, I mean, look, there's a version of this, I'm sure, in other towns that have neighborhoods that have elements of Soho in London, but
Pigalle in Paris, maybe.
Exactly. Well, you could,
not 42nd Street in New York anymore, though.
No, I was saying last night there are, yeah. I mean, the ghosts are there, but not now. But is that something that's always struck you of like, I don't really know what the question is here, but I guess the how much that adds to all of your work in terms of finding a tangible grounding of a location.
I think the grounding of it on one level, for the movie, if you're grounded in a real location, then it helps the sort of the fantastical surprise. And on a sort of practical level for me, it's also something that I'm just more invested if I'm honoring the location in a way. So when, like with Baby Driver, I'd initially written the script to be in Los Angeles, and because we couldn't afford to shoot in Los Angeles, and Atlanta came up as like an option, but to sort of double Atlanta for Los Angeles, I was like, I may as well just rewrite it for Atlanta.
Right.
And immediately, as soon as I did, it just made me more invested in being there because it was more interesting to me. And I think, we shot all of the Soho scenes in Last Night in Soho itself. But I think if there'd been a meeting early on where they're saying, oh, there's no way we can shoot in the actual Soho, that's impossible, we're going to have to fake it in other places, I probably wouldn't have done the movie. It just sort of I don't know, there's something where having some grounding in something real really helps when the movie itself is going to sort of become more surreal.
Well, and especially when you're talking about this film in particular, which is about the ghosts in the walls, metaphorically, of like just feeling the bones, that the history in an environment. This more than anything, you want to feel that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something where, the neighborhood, and, like many places in New York as well, it's easy to walk around with just your sort of blinkers on and not think about the history at all. But I think about it a lot, and, I do think about, what walls have seen and what has happened in places, and whether, there's any like psychic residue of events left behind. And, I'm not going to get into Dan Aykroyd kind of like sort of but I do, I mean, even without any scientific basis, in fact, I would believe that if a murder happened in a room, there would be something left behind. That definitely feels like that. I believe that idea. And it would certainly, it's interesting. There's a thing like in some kind of areas in the UK, there have been like places where serial killers it's two sort of places where like the Fred and Rose West, who are these infamous serial killers in the mid-90s, like terrible crimes, all committed in their house. And afterwards the house was bulldozed down, and they created a memorial garden at its place. So the house was just, once the police and the kind of had done their forensic work, it was just gone, like obliterated and replaced with a memorial garden. And in London, there was another serial killer, equally infamous, Dennis Nielsen, in the early 80s. And he killed, I think, more than 10 people in his flat in Crouch End, which is quite a bougie, fancy area of London. That flat still exists because some estate agent said, well, let's not be so hasty.
It's such a good location.
It's such a good location. We can still rent this place out. And I spoke to somebody the other day who knew somebody who had been shown that flat without being given all of the information. And they said, hey, this is a great price for this flat. I said, yes. I mean, it's like sort of, it's got some history, like behind there. But it is interesting that, though, to me, that's something that's just fascinating to me, of like what's left behind.
Yeah.
Just like in the air. I think about it a lot. And, where I live in London is an apartment building, which is all new, but it's on the site of a former hospital. And I remember mentioning this to my director friend, Joe Cornish, who did Attack the Block. And he said, he goes, oh, you're living in that place that used to be, I shouldn't say the name of the hospital, but he said, I said, yeah. And he goes, oh, lots of ghosts. And I was like, I said, don't say that. It's like a new flat. And he goes, yeah, but it's on the site. So I don't know. I kind of guess myself and my friends think about this stuff a lot.
Yeah, move into the poltergeist house next. Never over an Indian burial ground, right? Let's talk a little bit about your
That
amazing.
still looks like a nice house though in
It does.
Poltergeist.
I'm beautiful.
The neighborhood is beautiful. I once actually went on a hike down it's in like Agora Hills. I swear to God, I went on a hike in Agora Hills. And when I was walking back on this hike, I saw this view and I said, this looks really familiar. And I went back home and I said, it was a shot from Poltergeist. It was literally the scene where, oh God, what's his name? Creighton Nelson,
Yeah.
and James Karen are standing on that hill, and where he says about, oh, we just moved the gravestones, and he points down to the development. I was thinking, oh my God, it's that place. I was standing there. I knew it from somewhere. And as soon as I got back to my laptop, I sort of Googled it. It was found the shot.
Now I want to go back and watch Poltergeist for the 100th time. Let's talk a little bit about your amazing cast. So you've got Thomasin McKenzie, who's just been killing it the last few years, as has Anya Taylor-Joy, Matt Smith, used to perfection. But I'm curious also, the more esteemed elder statesmen, women of the cast. The last performance of the great Diana Rigg, she's fantastic in this. Terrence Stamp. Knowing you as I know you, and how much you love the lore and the history of cinema, how hard is it for you to have someone like Diana Rigg and Terrence Stamp and just ground the set to a halt with just asking them 1,000 different questions and stories?
I think the thing is, try and get that out of the way when you first meet them, or
that's what the dinner
I tend to do rehearsals and stuff.
Right.
So because obviously once you're there, there is that. I never quite get over the fact of Terrence Stamp is on the set, or Diana Rigg is on the set, or Rita Tushingham is on the set, and that's I noticed that there were other. I'd sort of got those out of my system because I met them before and asked them a lot of those questions. But sometimes the crew would want to ask something, but they didn't feel like it. For example, the camera assistant on the movie, Lewis Hume, his granddad shot all of the Avengers, and we went in the room with Diana, and I said, have you mentioned to Diana that your granddad is Alan Hume? He goes, no, I don't want to bother her. I was like, Diana! I said, Lewis is Alan Hume's grandson. She goes, oh, I love Alan. And then they started talking during a break for the next 25 minutes. And he was like, oh, thank you for that. I was too nervous to say it myself. So,
Do you have anybody?
And then I'm the kind of person, though, on a separate level, I'm the kind of person that then grinds work down to a whole. Well, I never do, but between setups, then I'm looking up Lewis's granddad on IMDb, who shot Return of the Jedi for Your Eyes Only. But one of his credits, I said, your granddad shot Toby Hooper's Life Force? Oh my God. And then he was just amazed that out of all of his credits, the Avengers, I think he did Gandhi maybe, or he definitely did some big movies. It's definitely Return of the Jedi and For Your Eyes Only. But I wanted to let's talk about Life Force.
That's the one that jumped out. Nostalgia plays a part of this film. I'm curious for you, are you someone that holds a specific time period in filmmaking as what are you most nostalgic about? What's the era that you put on a pedestal?
Well, I think we were talking about this last night. I think it was actually Mark Komodo who pointed this out to me, that people are always obsessed by the decade just before them. I think that's very true, because I was born in the mid-70s. I'm very obsessed with the 60s, and partly because my parents were there, not that their stories necessarily help at all. But and then I guess 70s as well, in terms of, that would be more the things that I would be aware of when I was very young, but I was too young to see.
Right.
I was certainly, even as a 5-year-old, aware that there was a film called Alien that I was not allowed to see. Or even seeing a poster for Friday the 13th, again, a film that absolutely I was not going to be seeing anytime soon. But I think you tend to kind of I tend to be fascinated by the 60s just because it was immediately before me, and it's such a fascinating, even just if you just chart all art, but whether it's film, music, fashion, but if you just chart from 1960 to 1969, the shift is enormous. and it's just so fascinating to look at. Even if you just look at that within the Beatles,
Right.
just the Beatles that exist in 1962 and the Beatles that split up in 1970. What a like, it feels like 6 lifetimes.
Right.
In like, you know, like sort of 8 years. It's extraordinary. So it feels, I mean, and I feel like I can kind of like sort of pinpoint like stuff in those decades, maybe in the 60s and 70s, a lot more in terms of when things would be, like from just seeing films or music, being able to pinpoint in a way that I couldn't do. I feel like whenever like it gets to like the years like 2000 to 2021, there's sort of just this, apart from odd things, there's not sort of enough kind of pinpoints of particular things for me to really be able to. I find it very difficult to, very good with dates, like from like sort of before me in a way, or even when I was sort of growing up, but like sort of this century, I feel is much more difficult to pin down. And I wonder if like, do you think in 30 years that people will be saying like, oh, the
22 of those 4, yeah,
2010s.
Exactly. You know, I hear you.
Maybe.
I have the power to time travel you to the set of any film, Edgar. What's the film you want to be on the set of, going back into history?
That's a good question. I think I'd like to witness a Busby Berkeley musical being shot. I think that would be amazing to see. I mean, I'm sure it would probably actually, the reality of it would be far more disturbing in terms of the work hours. I'm not sure I-80 would have signed off on a Busby Berkeley shoot. I mean, I think they did on the Busby Berkeley films. They did. It was in the days before the unions, and they used to shoot like crazy 32-hour days or something insane, to the point where people are passing out. And
I was going to say, like 3 more people broke their back today, but we got the shot.
Well, I think there was a thing, I read a biography about him where they, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be the greatest working conditions, but it would still be an amazing thing to witness, like when a musical like that, like a sort of Busby Berkeley or like a Gene Kelly musical. So to go back in time and be on the set of Gold Diggers of 1933, or like Singing in the Rain, or An American in Paris, that would be pretty amazing.
So as you know, I've been asking people for comfort movie picks the last year and a half, since we've needed comfort more than ever. I knew this was opening Pandora's box with you, because you could probably list off 10,000 different ones. I don't know if you saw Simon's. Do you know what Simon, your buddy Simon?
What did he pick?
What do you think he picked? What would your guess be?
Like Raiders of the Lost Ark? No.
He actually
Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead.
He went with Day of the Dead.
See, I would call that a bummer, Day of the Dead. Like Dawn of the Dead would be my Sunday afternoon film. Day of the Dead is a lot bleaker. That's quite a weird, maybe it says a lot about Simon.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe he was in a weird headspace that day. Your pick delighted me.
I can give you some context for this as well.
Give it to me. Yeah.
Well, and I'm not going to say what happened, but like maybe about 10 years ago, something really terrible happened to me, and it was just awful. And there was I didn't really know how to deal with it at all. And it was just something sort of personal. It was just like a horrible thing. And it was one of those things where the only thing to do was, one of my friends, Michael Pacor, happened to be in town. And I said, will you come over and just be with me? And he goes, of course, man, whatever you need. And I said, let's just watch funny movies. So I know that in times of comfort, I know exactly the 4 films I watched in a row. And it was the one thing that could raise me out of like a really bleak moment, was watching. And I'll come to the one we actually picked last. It was like, this is Spinal Tap, Airplane, Blazing Saddles, and Top Secret. And even though I was in the bluest, bleakest I'd ever been, I still laughed. And it was like, those films raised my spirits. And like, suddenly when you're watching this, I'm thinking, not everything's that bad. At least we got these films to make us laugh, right?
Yeah, at least we have Omar Sharif picking up fake doggy poo, but it's not fake. So, sorry, Omar.
Well, the reason I picked Top Secret is it's one that I feel like the other films are so well regarded, and especially in the case of Airplane, Blazing Saddles, like massive hits. And Top Secret is like maybe a bit more of a curate's egg in terms of, I don't think it was like really a hit at the time. And there are reasons for that as well, which are fascinating in their own right. But I guess because of that, I feel ownership over it, where it's a film that when it was, I think I watched it for the first time on VHS, and then when it was on TV, I recorded it. And once I'd recorded it off the TV, I just watched it again and again and again. And it's that thing where it's so dense with gags, that movie, and there's so much going on. It's just like such a glorious, like a glorious idiosyncratic sort of film, and also something that's, here's the reason that the Zuckers and Jim Abrahams is made by the same team that did Airplane. And in fact, Airplane had been a massive hit. And then they had made Police Squad on TV, which got cancelled after 6 episodes because it required people to actually watch the show and not just have it on in the background. So then, but then Top Secret is their follow-up to Airplane, and they're shooting it in the UK, and I think Paramount financed it, and they clearly have like a big budget because they're coming off the back of a mega hit. And when you watch the movie, I mean, there are so many set pieces where they would never spend that much money on a comedy now, like the underwater fight scene at the end, which is astonishing and astonishingly made. The incredible like Swedish bookshop scene with like a backwards oneer, where basically Peter Cushing, in one of his final roles, I think, is playing. They go to a Swedish bookshop where it's like the resistance are going to be there, where it's like a contact in the resistance. And if you haven't seen the film, there's like basically the whole shot is shot backwards. So that, I have a Swedish girlfriend, by the way. I never shown her this scene. Maybe she'd find it borderline offensive, but they're essentially saying that people speaking English backwards sounds like Swedish. So, the shot starts with like Peter Cushing and the magnifying glass by his eye, and then pulls it away. And he's got a massive prosthetic. That's the first joke. But then the shot carries on, and it's one shot. But I think on the Blu-ray you can watch it going forwards, because it keeps getting more and more impressive. Like Peter Cushing has got books that he's trying to put onto the shelves, and Val Kilmer is like throwing them back onto the bookshelves. But in reality, if you watch it being filmed, somebody is pushing the books off and he's catching them. And then also all the dialogue is backwards. So the Swedish in the movie is them going, yep, 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 yep. It's really, really great. And there's so much stuff in this film. It's just so jam-packed with great songs. Like it opens with a Beach Boys parody called Skeet Surfing. I wish they all could be double-barreled guns. It's just, now the thing is, the reason it flopped, and I actually did a Q&A with David Zucker, Jerry Zucker, and Jim Abrahams. Their theory on why Top Secret didn't do as well as Airplane is, with Airplane, they basically remade, or I think they had written the script based on a film called 0 Hour.
Right.
And they'd done it so closely that I think Paramount were forced to give credit to the writers of 0 Hour, because essentially they'd done a semi-remake. But it had the kind of bones of like a classic like airport disaster film. However, Top Secret is sort of doing two things at once.
Bizarre.
On one hand, it's like a World War II French resistance movie. And on the other hand, it's an Elvis movie. And like in reality, there is no Elvis like fighting in World War II as part of the French resistance. And even the timescales don't seem to quite add up in terms of, it's like during the Cold War, but they're definitely like the Nazis. And like Elvis is sort of like, the Elvis that's in the movie is more of like a late 50s, early 60s Elvis. I mean, he would be a 60s Elvis figure who happens to sing Beach Boys songs. So it's sort of like, in a way that maybe baffled some audiences, but delights me, they just threw the kitchen sink into this movie.
Well, it definitely feels like, yes, sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, it definitely feels like that second movie after you have the juice of the first movie, and you can kind of like go for broke and like throw a lot of crazy shit at the wall and have the budget. And I love also that, like, and it all makes sense that you would appreciate this, because like, so much comedy gets, crapped upon for being kind of lazy filmmaking. And this is the exact opposite. This is just like, as you mentioned, the underwater fight and the Cushing scene. These are like ambitious, loaded, dense filmmaking. And to this day, we don't see that much in comedy made like this. Yeah.
I think the thing is that there a lot of care was put into it. You could say the same about Mel Brooks as well. There's certainly Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein are sort of made very sort of high level in terms of production. And I think maybe later, once you get into the scary movies and all of the kind of the other ones that followed, then they're kind of just going for the cheapest options possible. And then it feels like you're watching like, a kind of D-list kind of SNL sketch or something.
Right.
But like Top Secret is like, you know, they have Peter Lamont, the actual Bond production designer, doing it. So like the set pieces are just kind of absolutely wild. And I think, again, it's like, if you tried to make that film now, you would only be able to make it off the back of a mega hit. It's a sort of similar thing with American Wealth in London, which is a different movie, but John Landis is making American Wealth in London on the back of Animal House and the Blues Brothers, like big hits. So he sort of kind of has,
right,
you know, he sort of writes his own check in terms of, so when you look at that movie, it's like, wow, the production values on this are really good. It's like, that's what happens when, you know, you kind of, I mean, I definitely, you know, when I watch Top Secret, I love it for that. And the thing is, if there's anything that's kind of slightly a bit left field about it, that like, those are reasons to love it more. And I think it's kind of grown in stature as something where all it wants to do is make you laugh, and it has nothing else on its mind whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a great pick. Everybody who has not checked out Top Secret, it is a fantastic one. Val Kilmer's film debut, if nothing else.
There's a shot in the movie at the time when he was making Top Secret. He was dating Cher, Val Kilmer.
I read that. Yeah,
and in the prison cell, do you see that? There's a picture of Cher on the wall. I gotta say, my favorite joke by far is one that's really lo-fi. Is when Val Kilmer's Nick Rivers gets thrown into prison. And, you know, there's a dissolve, and then you see that on the wall, he's like done the chalk marks, and there's like, you know, like sort of, what do you call those things? The tally, like, four strikes and a fifth.
Yeah.
So there's 4 strikes and a fifth, and there's 4 of them. So he's doing the, you know, that last one. And then his lawyer comes in, he goes, "Oh, thank God you're here. I've been here 20 minutes already." That's my favorite joke in the whole movie. It's just like, because it's just so brilliantly set up, and it's so dumb, and just the idea that he would chalk off each minute.
That or the sight gag of the giant phone in the foreground.
Glorious.
Let's bounce around some random stuff as we speak today. Have you caught up with Bond? Have you seen the newest No Time to Die?
I do. I'm good friends with Carrie, actually, and I went to the premiere, the royal premiere, which was really sort of thrilling. And in a weird way, and I said this to Carrie the other day, is that what was even more exciting was actually seeing it with a real audience. I went to see it again on a Saturday morning, like 12:30, and it was absolutely packed. You have to understand that in the UK, a James Bond film coming out is the equivalent of England being in the finals. It's such like national pride for Bond.
It's like when we get a Fast and Furious movie. It's like when we all come together.
Isn't that? Yes.
I mean, yeah.
It is have a barbecue. Yeah. It's funny that all of those films end with barbecues now, don't they?
Me too. Corona just has sponsored those movies, basically.
Surely the end of like the 10th one is they have to have a barbecue in space. Surely that has to be the end for the 10th one.
We've direct. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, like just so I went to see it like on a Saturday morning with a full house, and I think that made me even weepier than being at the premiere. Just I got a bit kind of misty-eyed even at the trailers. Usually all the things that my one pet hate about the cinema experience is when they put too many adverts in front of a film. And especially when it's Bond, if it's something that they know is going to be a big one, like Star Wars or Bond or Harry Potter, right, you have to sit through like half an hour of adverts. But strangely, maybe it was because I was just so happy to be in a completely packed house. Even the kind of even the advert asking me to buy gift cards kind of made me a bit misty-eyed.
How dark a year it was.
It's like, have you considered buying an Odeon gift card? I missed you. Exactly. I missed you.
Have you daydreamed of what your take on Bond would be? I've talked to some amazing filmmakers, like that, literally the top, like Nolan, Villeneuve. It's the one franchise for them that I can bring up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I need to do that."
It's funny. I mean, I do know Barbara Broccoli and stuff, so it's like these are things that sometimes I've shared with her. But I think the thing is, what's interesting to me is I think Daniel Craig has so made an indelible stamp on that franchise that I think you have to go in a slightly different direction, because I don't think there's anything to be gained by continuing in the same vein. And I would certainly think that it would be interesting to sort of try and, I mean, I do have a take, whichever they ask me, I'll definitely pitch it to them. So I'm not going to say it on the podcast. But I do think that when I sometimes see some of the names being bandied around, I can't quite see it in terms of, to me, they feel like Daniel Craig too. So when I like
Tom Hardy, I love Tom Hardy, but why do you do Tom Hardy after you did Daniel Craig? It's kind of.
I agree. Listen, this is not a knock on Tom Hardy or Michael Fassbender,
right.
But when I hear their names bandied about, it's saying, to me, that's too similar to Craig, because we've just seen a really great tough Bond. I mean, honestly, I think, you know, it wouldn't be a bad. My theory is that the Bonds have got to be like dark chocolate, milk chocolate, and I think you've got to alternate. Here's my Bond theory: dark chocolate, Sean Connery; milk chocolate, Roger Moore; dark chocolate, Timothy Dalton; milk chocolate, Pierce Brosnan; dark chocolate, Daniel Craig. It's crying out for another milk chocolate Bond. That's my theory.
No one wants to be milk chocolate. It's not as sexy.
No, but it's problem. Tasty and everybody loves it. Who doesn't like milk chocolate? Oh, you're not going to turn it down when it's given to you.
So Barbara calls you up and says, in 2 years, it's time to reboot Bond. You'd be interested?
I mean, she has my email.
Okay, fair enough. fair enough. Where are you at?
I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, she hasn't seen, well, by the way, Barbara and Michael actually helped out on Last Night in Soho because, you know, they had to sign off on the Thunderball poster.
Right.
So weirdly enough, at the end of the movie, you do see the 007 and Eon logo because they were very helpful in terms of, you know, because I do know them, I was able to go to them and saying, hey, I'd like to use the Thunderball poster in the movie. Can you make it happen? And so they did. So thank you to them.
Where are you at in terms of the?
So weirdly, the second movie in like October to have the 007 logo in the credits.
Look, take half of their global box office. You should be a happy man.
I take a tenth of their global box office. Are you kidding me? It's made in the UK. In the UK, it's made £70 million in the UK already. Like I think Skyfall made $100 million, so it's made £70 million in a pandemic. That's extraordinary.
The upcoming slate, I know the Baby Driver 2 script exists, I believe. I don't know if is Running Man still on the slate. Like what's occupying, what are you noodling with? Where do things stand on those two?
Well, the tricky thing is like, there's a couple of things. There's one, like, I think the pandemic sort of knocked all of the chess pieces off the board just in terms of whatever schedule there was kind of like sort of like disappeared like, you know, 18 months ago. But also there's an element where I really like haven't, because I've been promoting these two films for like 10 months and actually like once the movie's out, I'm just going to take a sort of chance to sort of clean the desk and I have like about 4 or 5 great things in development and most of which have like written scripts. And some of them are a bit more premature, like sort of, you know, The Running Man is not something that like a single word has been written yet. It was actually sort of maybe prematurely announced a little bit. So, and also, you know, there's been a massive regime change at that studio, so et cetera, et cetera. Right. So on top of that, I have this thing, having like nearly made a movie that I didn't make and having done interviews for that movie, I just feel like going forward, I just feel superstitious about talking about any movie that's not actually in the can. And I feel like that's a good like rule to impose upon yourself to just like don't jinx yourself basically. So I always like every interview ends with like, so what's next? And I'm like, well, I don't know. And even if I don't know, I'm telling you the answer. I don't really know exactly which one is next. And B, even if I did, I probably wouldn't say.
Well, let's end on talking about one other film that's not yours. Have Anya or your buddy George Miller tipped you off on Furiosa? Or do you get to be a war boy in this one? Are you getting a cameo?
I mean, I would love to go down and visit. I remember talking to George about, I'm not sure whether he's still doing the Mad Max sequel as well. I know at one point he was talking about doing 2 back-to-back. I'm not sure whether that is happening, but the Furiosa thing and the idea of it being a prequel, I've known about for a while. And it was actually, it was literally a couple of days before the lockdown in London. The last person I saw for dinner was George Miller. And it must have been like, maybe it was the day before the lockdown, because I remember even at that point, even though the government in the UK had not said we're locking the country down. I remember he came to watch Last Night in Soho in London. We went for dinner afterwards, and there was like nobody else in the restaurant. So I had this very surreal experience of talking to another director about my film and also a real doctor about the pandemic. Because George is still still has his, is a practicing, or when he's not practicing, but he has his license. He's still Dr. George Miller. And, but he did say forgive me if I told this story before when we were talking about Sparks, but he did say he goes, hey, what was Anya Taylor-Joy like to work with? And I said, oh, she's amazing. She's a star. He goes, well, I've been thinking about Furiosa. And I said, stop, you found her. I did say that. And I want Anya's agents to know that I'm coming for that commission.
Just anything, all the percentages, 1% of that, half the gross of bond.
I don't know how I qualify for the gross of bond, but I'll take it, man.
Congratulations, man, on this one. It was, unexpected in the best possible ways, and a true thrill to see in a theater with an audience. I know people are going to take this one. We can see that they already are, from as evidenced Last Night in Brooklyn and the other screenings you've had.
Last Night in Brooklyn, there's the sequel.
There you go, spinoffs. You just run it out to other filmmakers. You get Spike to do his. You just have everybody do their local town. Thanks as always for the time, man, and congrats.
Thanks, Josh. Lovely to talk as ever.